Welcome to another episode of the Wandering Watercolor. Today we are painting the first page of the complete beginner's guide to watercolor painting. Let's get started. Okay, so this is the very first page, and here we will be focusing on the water to paint ratio, which is the most important thing to understand about painting with watercolors. And as always, you want to have a place to mix your colors, your paints, a paper towel, and I have 2 jars of water here on the side. So the very first thing that we want to do is I'm going to grab some of the blue right here, and any paint works. You don't have to use the same one as me. I just like this paint because it's very vibrant and it's very affordable, and I will have links to everything in the description if you need it. But whatever you have will be more than fine. And so what I'm doing now is I'm grabbing a bunch of paint and mix it in here. I'm not using a lot of water, just a little bit of water and a lot of paint. So here's what will happen. Whenever we put the paint down, you see how it's very concentrated, very dark. And what we need to do next is I'm completely rinsing off my brush. So now there's only water on my brush. And I'm grabbing the water here, or the paint I should say, with the water and dragging it out. And you see how it fades it out, making it more transparent, and then rinse my brush off completely again, and then pulling off the edge here towards the end. You see how it creates this nice gradation from the darker to the lighter. And so that way you can kind of get a feeling of the water versus paint ratio. So the next thing that's really important to understand is the layering and how the pigment or the paint to water ratio works. And the way you do that is we can grab some of this green right here. And it doesn't have to be a lot, somewhere between, like halfway between the amount of paint and water. And what we'll do is we'll completely fill this in. We'll just completely fill this in. This is called a flat wash. And we'll fill this in like this. Remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just kind of trying to get a feel for the layering and the amount of water versus the amount of paint that you're using. So we're going to let this dry. And then the next thing we'll do is we'll focus on this side. So here, we're going to grab the purple. And purple is usually a very strong color. It's darker and it comes off a little more. Usually, I've noticed this throughout different brands of watercolor paint. Purple tends to be a little strong. So we're just going to kind of mix it on the lighter side here. And what we'll do is we'll fill this in like that. And same for this side. And then I'm going to grab a paper towel or a rag. I'm just going to take off some of the paint from the brush. I'm going to grab a little bit of water, and there's still a little bit of paint on the brush along with the water. I'm going to put it on top, and I'm also going to pick up some from this side. And so you see there's a much fainter layer on the top here. And I'm going to dry off my brush. And then I'm going to grab, now that this is dry, the green here is pretty dry, we're going to grab a lot more green and then a little bit of brown to just kind of darken it up. More green. And then so here what we'll do is we will put the darker green on top of what we placed before. And then, you see how I left it kind of like halfway. I'm going to rinse off my brush completely and then kind of pull it out how we did it, the same way that we did over here. I'm going to dry off my brush, and then towards the end here, I'm just going to use a dry brush to pick up the excess. So you can see how it transitions from dark to lighter, but because we have the layer of paint underneath, it actually, it doesn't come out as light as it does over here. So this kind of gives you an idea of how you can layer the paint and use water on top of it to make the different transitions. Now for this circle, what we're going to do is we're going to fill it in completely with water. Just taking my brush and putting some water down. And then on top of that, just gonna grab just a little bit of black, and I'm just gonna dab it right in the middle here. So you can see how it spreads a little bit. I'm gonna rinse my brush off completely. And then because this circle is entirely full of water, if I kind of move it around, you can see how it moves all of the pigment, or all of the paint, I should say. So this is another technique that you can use to kind of spread color around. And you can see how it's concentrated in the middle and it fades out and just kind of pulls out of the middle. And if you want to, you can add more just to see what happens. Like when you add more, you see how it spreads. And this kind of helps you get a really good understanding of the amount of water versus the amount of paint, because you can see how there's so much paint in the middle here, and then when you pull it out slowly, you can see how it dilutes the paint, therefore making it a lighter color. And you can play around with that. This is a really good visual to kind of understand the difference between using too little paint, too much water, or too much water, not enough paint. It really helps you kind of get an understanding of how those two are always at play when you're watercolor painting. Now, because this is dry, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get purple directly from the paint. I'm not going to dilute it with any water. I'm just going to get it directly from the paint, and I'm going to place it directly on top of this side, which really gives you an understanding of how dark you can get the colors. I didn't mix it with any other color, and I didn't put any, well, there's a little bit of water on the brush, that's why we can pick it up off of the little paint cup. But you can see how much darker this is. It's the exact same color, but it's an order of magnitude darker because there's almost no water in it. And this gives you a good idea of how you can use the same exact color to build up shadows, or just like show emphasis. It can make really nice transitions, like here or here. You play around with the intensity. Now that you have a basic understanding of that, we can move on to this side. So this is just a very simple scene, and the way that we're going to fill in all of this is basically in 3 steps. The very first one, for the sky here, we'll do it the exact same way that we did this little gradient. So what we'll do is we'll get some of the blue, and you can make it a little more intense, a little more paint, less water up here. And you just do that up here like this. And then we're just gonna wet the brush, rinse it off, basically just using water to draw out the color going downwards. And then just kind of bringing it down and lightening it up as we get towards the bottom. You may have seen different paintings like this on different social media. These are fun to do because they're very quick and you get a nice effect as you paint them. Don't worry about getting into any of the shapes. It's okay if you go over or overlap. And that's it for this part. now you want to get some of the brown here, and you can just get it directly from the paint. What we'll do is we'll just lay it down here. And then draw the rest up here like we did for the sky, but then going backwards in the other direction. Okay, just like that. And now for the trees, we'll just grab some green, kind of dilute it, do a lighter green. And then we're just going to color all of them in. Don't worry, we'll build up another layer on top of that. And sometimes I'm just drying off my brush here, but sometimes the edge doesn't mix quite right. And what you can do is with a dry brush, just go in and just kind of muddy up the edges to help the blending become smoother, if that's what you're going for. You can also just leave it more jagged, if that's what you prefer. And then for the house here, we're going to grab a little bit of the red and the brown. I'm going to mix them together, a little more red. We don't want it to be too much though. And we're just going to layer that in here. Now, if you get into a situation where the color starts pulling out a little bit, that's just because this part is still a little wet. And the way that you can fix it is rinse off your brush, dry it off, and then kind of pick up some of that edge. With a dry brush, or with your actual rag or paper towel. And that's fine. And then we're going to go back here. We're going to grab some of that darker green. And we're just going to create some variation in between the trees. I'm going to rinse that off. I'm going to grab some of the brown here again, and then we're just going to add it directly in here for the trunks. And I'm also going to throw in some here for the door. Now, this is a very basic example. Obviously, the shapes are very basic, and all of the rendering is basic, but it gives you a good solid foundation to understand how you can layer different layers of paint, depending on how much water you're incorporating, to give different effects. So that's this page, and if you have any questions, just comment and I'll respond, or send me an email. I usually try to respond within 24 hours. And so this one is done, and now we can move on to the next technique.